Good evening, I'm Nathaniel filling in for Nima Rajan. This is Forum Daily for Monday, February 6th. We begin our newscast tonight with more on a devastating 7.8 magnitude earthquake that hit Turkey and Syria this morning. Authorities fear that the death toll will continue to rise after an earthquake rocked both countries just before dawn on Monday. So far, more than 3,400 people are confirmed dead and at least 10,000 others injured. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said they don't know how high those numbers will rise to as debris removal efforts continue in many areas of the earthquake zone. While responding to news of the earthquake, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says Canada stands ready to help. Mr. Trudeau called the reports and images out of the earthquake region devastating. The quake hit a region shaped on both sides of the border by more than a decade of civil war in Syria. Well, as we move into the second month of 2023, experts are uncertain about how the Canadian dollar will perform this year. Experts say the outlook for the loonie in 2023 largely depends on commodity prices, how the US dollar fares, and whether central banks are successful in avoiding a major recession. The Canadian dollar recently rose to its highest level in more than 2 months against the US dollar, which gained strength on Friday after a stronger than expected jobs report. However, analysts are predicting some further weakness in the greenback for 2023. In a report from early January, Scotiabank said the Canadian dollar's outlook for the year is highly contingent on external developments, with commodity prices and valuation potential positives for the dollar. Moving to the West Coast, where it is back to the legislature today for British Columbia's provincial politicians. Premier David Eby says the government's key priorities will be healthcare, housing, public safety, and the economy. He says in the face of a global slowdown and potential recession, his government will keep the economy strong by building trade relationships and supporting businesses. Provincial politics is also set to heat up in Quebec as Premier François Legault is calling a by-election for Montreal to replace former Liberal leader Dominique Anglade. Voters in the riding of Saint-Henri-Saint-Anne will cast their votes March 13th. Madame Anglade resigned after her once dominant party won less than 15% of the vote in last October's election, but held on as official opposition. According to a Public Health Ontario science brief, research shows that mask mandates helped to reduce COVID-19 spread and severe illness, but there is limited evidence that they helped more than a recommendation. Finding is mentioned in a brief done by the health agency after Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Kieran Moore, requested evidence on masking amid a triple threat viral surge in the fall. The brief says that masking, along with other public health measures, can help prevent transmission of the flu, RSV, and COVID-19, but a mandate may not have eased the pressures on children's hospitals. Public Health Ontario concludes that a layered approach, including masking, vaccination, and staying home when sick, would reduce respiratory viral transmission among children. Over on the East Coast, hundreds of people this morning were still feeling the impact of a weekend cold snap that burst water pipes and power outages. As of this morning, there were less than 1,000 Nova Scotia Power customers still in the dark, down from about 30,000 at the peak of the blackouts. The frigid temperatures forced many people to leave their homes after water pipes burst in a number of residences in parts of Atlantic Canada. A small earthquake shook parts of Ontario this morning with no reports of damage. The U.S. Geological Survey reported the 3.8 magnitude earthquake struck just east of Buffalo at around 6:15 a.m., while measuring 4.2 in magnitude on the Canadian side of the border. Earthquakes Canada says the quake was only lightly felt and the damage from it would be unexpected. Uber Technologies says it's bringing back a service in Canada that offers a discount of up to 20% to passengers sharing a ride with a stranger. The ride-hailing giant says Uber X-Share will launch later this week in Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. The service, previously known as Uber Pool, was paused in 2020 when the COVID-19 pandemic pushed people to physically distance. The new model provides drivers with an extra $1 pickup incentive for a second rider. It sees an average of only 6 more minutes added to trips where Uber X-Share is used. The Federal Fisheries Department says a North Atlantic right whale has been disentangled off the coast of the United States. It says this is the first whale entanglement confirmed to be related to Canada's lobster fishery in over 5 years. The gear was identified as being from a zone off southern Nova Scotia. Now, that connection was made because the fisher had reported their lost fishing gear to the department, as is required by the conditions of their license. Forum Daily will be right back after the break. And when we return, we're going to be taking a look at rising food prices, the frozen food sector, and food security for lower income Canadians. We're speaking with Dr. Sylvain Charlebois, Senior Director of the Agri-Food Analytics Lab at Dalhousie University. And after that, a conversation about Black History Month in Canada with Dr. Jean Augustine. So stay with us. We'll be right back after the break here on Forum Daily. We'll see you soon. Nestle Canada has announced it will be phasing out the sale of its frozen meals and pizzas in Canada over the next 6 months. The company says the decision to wind down sales of brands including Delissio, Stouffer's, Lean Cuisine, and Life Cuisine will allow it to further invest in categories that support long-term business growth. These include confectionery, coffee, ice cream, premium water, and pet food. Now, this comes at a time when rising food prices are a concern to many, especially as a holiday price freeze at many grocery chains comes to an end. Joining us to discuss the situation is Dr. Sylvain Charlebois, a food expert and senior director at the Agri-Food Analytics Lab at Dalhousie University. Dr. Charlebois, welcome to Forum Daily.
Well, thank you.
So what's the overall significance of Nestle's move here? Is this reflective of an overall shift away from frozen food in the market, or is this just a one-off with Nestle?
I think it's a one-off because right now, with a higher food inflation rate, there's actually more traffic at the frozen aisle right now. So the Nestle's decision is somewhat counterintuitive, really. I think it has a lot to do with the economics of selling food in Canada, and my guess is that they may have had some challenges dealing with a few grocers and cover the entire market. So they're just withdrawing, but that's going to be allowing other players to come in and fill that void. The problem right now is that we're looking at a 6 month window here. They're exiting in 6 months, which doesn't give the industry a whole lot of time to pivot.
Indeed, pivot. And as you mentioned there, you are seeing more traffic at the frozen food aisles. So how significant overall is for the frozen food sector to lowering food costs for families and individuals, as well as the grocery sector writ large?
Well, I'm sure you've been at a grocery store of late, and you may have noticed that the frozen aisle has gotten much bigger. I mean, it's really big, and Nestle actually covers several SKUs. I'd say probably, when you look at doors, it may cover 10, 15 doors in some cases. So it's a lot of SKUs to cover, absolutely. But over the years, we've seen more investments, more companies looking in frozen foods just because it's convenient, it's practical, it's affordable, and you can actually store it for a while, forget about it, and whenever you need something right away, well, it's there.
Convenience, yes. Now, shifting gears slightly, we know that the major grocery chains have ended or are ending their holiday price freeze. So what is the impact here? What can consumers expect to come down the pipeline?
Well, we're expecting the frozen aisle to become a little bit more expensive, the center of the store as well. The so-called blackout period has ended, and that would impact non-perishables, and of course the freezer aisle. The freezer aisle has become more popular of late in recent years just because of the quality. The quality has improved massively. There's more choice as well, but we are expecting the end of the so-called price freeze to actually impact different products, but it may actually not last. We are expecting by mid-spring things to level off a little bit when it comes to prices.
Well, mid-spring leveling off prices. I'm sure that's good news for everyone, myself included. Now, if we can take a look at specific grocery sets, what are we expecting to see the biggest price increases? I know you mentioned frozen foods, but are there other sectors as well?
So when you look at the entire grocery store, I'd say there are two areas where we are expecting food prices to increase. One is dairy. On February 1st, farm milk prices did go up. Farmers are getting more. That's going to work its way. That increase is going to work its way through the supply chain. And that's going to impact consumers. Well, right away with fluid milk, and later on with cheese, yogurt, and other dairy products, unfortunately. And the other category is bakery. Bakery really has gone up in price, and so we are expecting that trend to continue, unfortunately.
bakery, dairy. This brings to mind something I've seen south of the border, a lot of reports about egg smuggling into the United States. Now, we haven't really seen that
Yes.
issue necessarily here in Canada. Egg smuggling, as a concept seems very unique. But uh, what is the situation? What's driving that egg shortage in the United States?
That's a good question, and we actually do get that question a lot. A lot of people are concerned about egg prices and egg shortages. The regime in the United States is very different. Egg prices have gone up 60% year to year, but in Canada, it's gone up 17% due to the fact that we have a highly vertically coordinated industry in Canada, allowing farmers, the CFI, and everyone else involved uh, with the industry to better manage risks related to the avian flu. The avian flu really has made things very difficult in the US.
February marks Black History Month in Canada. This month long observation provides the opportunity to highlight the contributions, impact, and accomplishments of Black Canadians to their communities and to Canadian history. Joining us to share about Black History Month is someone whose contribution was key in designating February as Black History Month in Canada. As one of the architects of the initiative, the Honourable Dr. Jean Augustine was a major advocate for equity, diversity, education, and economic opportunity as an elected official. In 1993, Dr. Augustine was the first Black woman to be elected to the Parliament of Canada, representing the riding of Etobicoke Lakeshore. She went on to serve in various other roles. Today, she continues her legacy of advocacy and community improvement through her foundation, the Jean Augustine Centre for Young Women's Empowerment. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Augustine.
I'm very pleased to join the forum. Thank you.
We are thrilled to have you today. You drove the initiative, designating February as Black History Month in 1995. So I'm sure it was a historic process. What all happened? What entailed that day?
Well, it was an interesting day, and it was a day that I waited for pretty close to, 6 to 9 months, almost like the birth of a baby. And that is from the time I approached the House to designate or to have that motion passed, and to ensure that I got something in there which was non-debatable. That I had words and I had ideas and I had things that could not be debated. And so the motion was a very short one. It says that African Canadians have been here for the 400 years. It said that we've been making contributions to Canadian society. It said that we were a diverse African Canadian community, and ask that this be recognized in Canada, and that February be designated as Black History Month in Canada. I had a party, from the NDP, a seconder, from the Bloc Québécois seconder, and from the Reform Party at the time, another seconder. And so it was unanimously passed. I was happy. I was on top of the world, because as an educator, I had come from teaching social studies for many, many years, where I taught nothing about Indigenous people. I taught nothing about treaties or land claims or residential schools. I saw nothing in the textbook about African Canadians, with the exception of the Underground Railroad. And so I was happy that now that the House, Canada as it were, has designated February as Black History Month in Canada, that now educators, teachers, curriculum writers, entertainers, corporate Canada, religious settings, that we will now acknowledge the contribution of people of African descent.
I think that education component is extremely important to the adoption of Black History Month. So since it was adopted, have you noticed changes to public awareness regarding anti-Black racism in this country?
Well, I think it has made a big difference, because, as you know, we're talking now because we're talking about Black History Month in Canada. Black History Month is celebrated and acknowledged all across this country, from coast to coast to coast. And one of the things that I have been stressing, Nathaniel, and I want to stress it here, is that Black history is not just for Black people. Black history is Canadian history. It's all of our history. And it's important for us to know each other's history. I also want to stress that it's Black History Month in Canada. In the United States, they're also celebrating Black History Month. They started since 1929. And so I'm stressing Black History Month in Canada because I want us to talk about Canadians, Black Canadians, African Canadians who've been contributing, who have contributed, who have participated in every aspect of Canadian life. And our young people should know this so that when you ask, the names that come up, like, Barack Obama, Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, in the music world, they threw out. And we need to show that right here in Canada, we have Black Canadians, and that we don't necessarily have to look to the South, but that February, Black History Month in Canada, we focus on the African Canadians who've been making a difference in Canada.
Powerful words, Dr. Augustine. Thank you so much for joining us today on Forum Daily, and let's hope we can take your message throughout the year. Russian forces are keeping up the pressure on eastern Ukraine as Moscow assembles additional combat power there for an expected offensive. Weeks of intense fighting continue to rage in towns across the Donetsk region. Fighting comes as more aid is pledged for Ukraine by Western countries. Norway announced today that it will donate the equivalent of $7.3 billion US in a multi-year support package. Last night, Defense Minister Nathaniel confirmed that the first Leopard tank donated by Canada to Ukraine has arrived in Poland. Turning to the Middle East, where Israeli forces killed 5 Palestinian gunmen in a raid on a West Bank refugee camp. This morning's raid, which the military said was meant to arrest suspects allegedly involved in a botched attack on Israelis, is likely to further exacerbate tensions in the region. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says 2 of those killed were involved in the attack. The Palestinian president called the raid a crime. The diplomatic fallout over an air balloon continues, with China expressing its anger in response to the United States shooting down the craft. China is accusing the U.S. of indiscriminate use of force against the suspected Chinese spy balloon after it traversed sensitive military sites across North America. China insists the flyover was an accident involving a civilian aircraft and was completely out of their control. The U.S. has denied China's claims that the craft was civilian and is taking the wreckage for study. Well, staying in the U.S., where the National Guard has been activated to help evacuate an eastern Ohio town in the aftermath of a nearby train derailment that happened on Friday. The village of East Palestine said this morning that authorities would begin to enforce what had previously been a strongly recommended evacuation zone within a 1.6-kilometer radius of the crash site. Officials are working to prevent a major explosion. About 50 cars derailed in a fiery crash Friday night as the train carried a variety of products from Illinois to Pennsylvania. Unions in the United Kingdom are staging what they are calling the biggest strike in the history of the country's public health system. Tens of thousands of nurses and paramedics walked off the job in the latest wave of strikes that have disrupted the lives of residents for months. Nursing unions say emergency care and cancer treatment will continue during their 48-hour walkout, but thousands of appointments and procedures are likely to be postponed. The ambulance service says it will respond to the most urgent calls during their day-long strike. While more job losses are hitting the tech industry, with Dell announcing it's cutting about 6,600 jobs. The computer maker says the steps it took earlier to stay ahead of eroding market conditions are no longer enough. Profits have slipped over the past 2 quarters at the company, which employed about 133,000 people at the start of last year. Amazon, Google, and Microsoft are among other tech companies that have pared back workforces that were expanded during the pandemic, but still remain substantially larger than they were 3 years ago. Meanwhile, hundreds of demonstrators from India's main opposition party have gathered in New Delhi and other cities. They are demanding regulators investigate allegations of fraud and stock manipulation by India's second biggest conglomerate, headed by coal mining tycoon Gautam Adani. The Adani Group suffered a massive sell-off of its shares after US-based short-selling firm Hindenburg Research accused it of various fraudulent practices. The Adani Group has denied any wrongdoing. Mr. Adani and his companies have lost tens of billions of dollars as investors have dumped shares. Well, moving to Africa, where a judge in Kenya has ruled that Facebook's parent company Meta can be sued in the East African country. Meta tried to have the case dropped, arguing that Kenyan courts do not have jurisdiction over their operations. However, the Labour Court judge dismissed that in a ruling on Monday. A former Facebook moderator in Kenya, Daniel Moteng, is suing the company, claiming poor working conditions. He said that while working as a moderator, he was exposed to gruesome content, such as rape, torture, and beheadings, that risked his and his colleagues' mental health. He said Meta did not offer mental health support to employees, required unreasonably long working hours, and offered minimal pay. Well, Canadians cleaned up at this year's Grammy Awards. Pop favorites Michael Bublé and Drake were among the homegrown talents, adding a shiny new gramophone to their shelves. Drake won Best Melodic Rap Performance for his appearance on Future's Wait For You, while Bublé's Higher was named Best Traditional Pop Vocal Album. Singer-songwriter Tobias Jesso Jr. won the inaugural Songwriter of the Year non-classical award, recognizing creators who penned some of the year's standout pop tunes. The North Vancouver native won a second Grammy for co-writing Boyfriends for Harry Styles' Harry House, which won Album of the Year. I'm Nathaniel Dewick, filling in for Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you can always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and make sure to follow us on our social media handles. We're available on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also visit our commentary programming on the News Forum YouTube channel. Thanks for joining us today on Forum Daily, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us tonight.